Okay, so today we're going to be doing portraits, and I will be doing a charcoal portrait. If you use one of the pictures that are that's in the pack that I provided, make sure you're using an A4 one and not one of the slightly smaller ones. Sometimes I think there may be some A5 images. We need it to be A4 because charcoal, it's quite hard to be very precise when you're using particularly stick charcoal. So you'll be using any image that you like. If you happen to have this one, you're welcome to copy the same one, but it will work across any of the images that that I provided, or you can use one that that you've printed out yourself. It really doesn't matter. We'll be working from black and white because it's much easier to work in a tonal drawing when you are looking at a tonal photograph. So we're not worrying about colour. One of the reasons that we're using a coloured sugar paper to work on, that's thought. This is sugar paper, so make sure you use sugar paper, not normal cartridge paper, which is too smooth for the charcoal and will rub off too easily. Sugar paper has slightly more knot to it, which is the roughness of the paper. If you feel it, it's relatively smooth to feel, but when it comes to pencils going onto it, it grabs the charcoal or the graphite more. Okay, so I recommend blue, or you can use a sort of buff or an orange as well. I'm going to show you some examples of other people's work that I've got here. Again, you can see that they're using a sort of greyish brown background, and we will be looking at dark tones, white highlights where you'll be using your white pastel, but the colour of the paper is actually your mid-tone. So although we know he has a white face, we're not going to be using the pastel to colour it all in. The mid-tones are the colour of the paper, and we're just putting in the details and the dark tones with the charcoal. So here's another example. This one, you have a slightly more linear effect. You can see the marks. And this one here. These are called vignettes, this style of portraiture. So quite often you focus in on the face, but actually it begins to blur and merge out at the edges. They haven't worried about putting in lots of detail of the hair. That's more, it's just fading into shadow. There's another one, which is very much just focusing on the face and not worrying about hair at all. And there we go. As you can see with all these pictures, they're all working on a coloured background. So sort of blues, greys, buffs. The eyes are always quite prominent. You usually have a reasonable amount of detail on the eyes, but the rest is much softer. And again, not so much detail around the edges, not worrying about the hair. You can do the hair, obviously. I'll be doing some of the hair today so that I can show you that. This is, I'll show you one more, which is a slightly different style. So these are laminated, which is why it's not always that easy to see. You can see here, this is very dark, and they've used a lot more pastel for this one to highlight the face, and they've just put in a big sweep of the hair there. Okay. So what we're going to be doing first is tracing out the picture. Now for today, to keep it quick and simple, and so that we get a definite image that we can work from, we're going to be using carbon paper. It doesn't matter which colour you use really, because you will be going over it. I almost always use the black because you're guaranteed to get a nice definite image. So we put the carbon paper down first, making sure the ink side is facing down, the writing side is faced up, and we take a little bit of tape, masking tape, and we tape it down in the centre of the paper. Pat it down very gently. You don't want to stick it down too hard with too much pressure, because you need to be able to take it back up without ripping the paper. So I'm just taping down the corners very lightly to make sure it stays in place. I'm putting the picture over the top and then taping her down. You'll be drawing for quite a few minutes, and you need to make sure it's not going to budge, because even a millimetre out in the middle of the drawing and you're going to end up with a Picasso style face, which, although is fine, it's not what we're aiming for today. There we go. Just taped those down very lightly, as you can see, just enough to hold it in place. Now, although we're using carbon paper now, you have to put a reasonable amount of pressure on to make sure that you get a drawing come through on the other side. If you were doing this for a drawing which is going to be a sustained piece of artwork that you want it to be really lovely and as perfect as you can, I wouldn't recommend, if it's going to be a present, say, I wouldn't recommend using the carbon paper. Obviously you can't rub it out, and sometimes people find it a little bit annoying that they've got quite a dark mark which they can't get rid of because you can't rub it out. So if you're going to do your own one, I would recommend making your own carbon paper. And again, it's you just add pencil. I'll just move this out of the way. You use pencil rubbed onto the back of a normal piece of paper. A thin piece of paper is best. Put on as much graphite as you can, and that effectively becomes your carbon paper, so that when you draw on it, it will come through. Now, sugar paper isn't the same as normal white paper, and quite often you might use your homemade carbon paper to trace out an image, and you suddenly realise, oh, it just really hasn't come through in some places, and you will just have to use your own eyes to work out where the line should be. And but for today, because I want you to have a guaranteed image to work from quickly, that's why we're using the carbon paper and not homemade carbon paper, because you don't want to have to then do it all over again. I'll quickly show you. Often pencil on sugar paper doesn't show up as well. Actually, it shows up quite well on the visualizer, but when you're actually looking at it, it doesn't show up as well as on normal paper. But the ink of the carbon paper does. Right, so grab a biro pen. You can use a pencil. I just like to use a biro because it's guaranteed to stay sharp, rather than a pencil where you want to keep a nice thin line, and you don't want to have to be worrying about sharpening your pencil halfway through. So we're going to be drawing round the outline of her face and features. So these will act as a guideline for the rest of the drawing. It's quick and it's easy, and professional artists will do exactly the same as this, just so that they can meet a deadline, get on quickly. So there's nothing wrong with quickly tracing out particular features. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm just going to put in a few marks to show where her hairline is. Now, obviously, in a 2D picture, you get a very definite line where the hair is. If I was to show you on him, you get a very definite line. Now, we know that hair isn't, for most people, hair isn't a very definite line. It's actually lots of small marks. So if you've got an image like this, you just want to put a few little flicks in, a few little marks to show where the hairline is. But what you do not want to do is do one big solid line, because that will be there in the drawing and you can't hide it particularly well. So you're just a few little marks so that you know that this is where the hair starts, and then you can put a few marks around the edge of the hair. This is where the hair ends. Okay, but this is not a highly detailed drawing. This is just our base drawing. So for her, it's not so bad because we have a definite sweep of hair, the curls, so we can put those in like that. We'll put one up here for where her hair finishes round here, round where her ear is. Sweep of hair there. And down here. I'm trying not to lean my hand too much on the carbon paper because it can still print through the pressure of the hand. So try not to put too much pressure on your hand, sort of hold it upright a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to come down and do the edge of her face. This is a very well defined edge of her face, so there's no problem with doing a line all the way around. Take the time. You still need to, even though you're tracing, you need to do it accurately, and it's quite easy to just do it just even a few millimeters out and it begins to look wrong. So I've done this line down here. Now this bit of her jawline is much more subtle. You know, there's no hard line there. This is a hard line because the darkness behind it, the shadow behind it brings it forward. Now here, what you want to do is just put a little mark to show where it's curving up here, and then at the corner of the jaw you can put another line in there, and then this is fine to go quite dark again, put a solid line. But here you don't want to put a line in. You know that from this point to this point is pretty much a sort of straightish line, but that is going to be just subtle shading with the charcoal. Okay, right, the back of her neck can be quite well defined, that's fine. This part of her neck can be quite well defined. I'm just going to put in a mark where the light hits, and then we've got the shadow here. I'm going to put another line in here. I'm not going to bother with any of this kind of detail because I'm not going to be putting that into my picture. We are just focusing on the face. Okay, so now a little bit of the ear, just where the ear, I don't know what that bit of the ear is called, but where that sticks out a little bit, and the shadow behind. Okay. Now eyebrows. Again, they're quite well defined, particularly on this picture, but we know that particularly with girls, lips and eyebrows and eyelashes can sometimes be a bit more awkward because they're wearing makeup, and you have to take that into account. So we know that this is actually made up of lots of separate hairs, so we treat it as such. I'm going to put in a few marks to show the shape of the hair and the eyebrow, but I'm not going to, certainly not going to colour it all in. It's just a few marks as a guideline. Again, here the eyebrow is there. There's a tiny mark there. It sweeps down this way, so a few marks to show where the eyebrow is. Okay, because when we come to do shade it in, again, it won't be a solid block shape. Somebody like him, obviously he's got loads of hairs. We don't need to put them all in. You just need to put in where it gets really dark and shadowy. So you could put a mark here, and then you just put a few little flecks in just there, just to show the edges, how far up they go. If you do the top and the bottom, you know that in between there are lots of other hairs. Again, with someone like Angelina, who's very well defined, you're not going to draw a square, you know, a line going all the way around. You're going to put the little flecks in so you just get the idea of the shape. Now, eyes. The top eyelid is very well defined because of the eyelashes. Even pale eyelashes define that top eyebrow. So you can put in quite a well defined line there. For this bit here, put in a few marks, but again not a solid line, because we know that that is just where the eyelid is curving over the eyeball. So we don't want a really definite line. This bit will be shaded in with charcoal. So some guidelines are all you need. You do need to put in the definite line of her iris, okay, and also where the pupil is. Make sure that that's quite definite. Now, she's got quite big eyes, and because she's not smiling too much, it's not crinkling her eyes up. But normally the bottom eyelid actually cuts off that little bottom bit of the iris. There's almost, in almost all pictures, with all people, that bottom bit of the iris is flat. So you can put in a mark there to show that it's flat. Again here, it's flat, so put that in. Now the bottom eyelid is much more subtle. There's less definition there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little mark in here which shows where the corner of the eye comes down, and then you've got the line where the eyelashes go, and that goes there. So this is the white of the eye, then you've got the line where it touches, and then you've got that white bit of the eye, the inner eyelid kind of thing, where you need to make sure that that is defined there. So you've got the two lines. Again, not going to put in anything here because that is very subtle shading, but we know that directly beneath these lines, that's where the shading goes. I'm going to put a tiny mark here just to show where that shading stops, and then we get a nice bit of white highlight here. The inner part of the eye here can be reasonably well defined because that is always much darker. I'm going to put in a little mark here to show where the shadow of the nose starts. And I know that there's going to be a gentle curve of shadow here. So I'm not going to put a mark in. I'm just going to use my common sense when I look back at the picture. There's going to be a line. Okay, I'm just going to put a little line in, just little marks to show where the shading of the nose goes. Now, on the nose, the nostrils are always quite well defined, so you can put those in nice and clearly, and they will help act as a very useful guide for the nose. And pretty much with when it comes to portraits, less is definitely more when it comes to the nose. You really don't want to be putting too much detail in a nose. They're very awkward, and yeah, definitely less is more. So just a few marks. You can put a mark around where the edge of the nostril, that's always quite well defined. You can put a mark in there. I'm just going to put a little mark here to show where the shading goes. So I can see that the dark shadow goes to that mark, and then there's a little bit of paler shading comes to this mark. And again, a little mark here as a guideline to show where the shading down the centre of the nose will go. Okay. Onto this eye, again, well defined top lid. Don't worry about putting all the eyelashes in. This is quite a well defined bit here. There we go. I'm going to put a little mark there to show as a guide where the shading is going to go. As you get, you know, if you do a lot more portraiture and practice, you won't have to put in as many guidelines, because you'll get to better at knowing where the shading is going to go. But you know, when you're just starting out, it's a really good guide to have those in there. Again, around the iris, around the pupil, the flat of the iris there. Little mark to show that where the inner part of the eye is, and there's a little mark there to show where you get that the edge of that inner eyelid comes. Little mark here. Okay, so we've just got some little markings here. Not going to put anything on this bit here. Lips. Again, lips can be awkward because actually you are often lips are defined more by their colour than anything else. Actually, we don't have very definite lines on our lips. You know, usually for a girl they might be wearing lipstick, so you have to kind of ignore the fact that she's wearing lipstick and has maybe she has a very bright red lipstick that makes it really well defined. You don't really want that. So the upper lip, you need to put a few marks in where I don't know, is it the bow of the lips kind of comes here, and then there's a mark there, and so that you get the shape of the lips quite accurate, you have to put in a few different marks, because it bends in a little bit there before then going out and curves around. But avoid doing one very big black line going all the way round. The only place that you actually do get a much stronger defined line is where the lips meet. So that's fine to put in a strong line there. Put a little mark here for I can see where the shading's going to go. Now the bottom lip is actually the least defined part, because actually it curves around, and it's actually the shadow under the lip that defines that bottom lip. So the shadow under it is just there. So I'm just going to put a mark there, put a little mark over here. Corners can be quite well defined, that's no problem. But you have to be very careful with that bottom lip, because it's the shadow underneath. And this bit here is just a little bit of shading. If we look at Angelina, you can see that it's underneath the lip there that we'll be shading. Okay. Again with oh, I can't remember what his name is. Steve McQueen. I don't know. You can do again. You've got the shadow is underneath the lip. You can see that the top lip is better defined shadow wise. The bottom lip always catches the light more, which is why you then get a shadow underneath to help define it. Let me see if I can find an image on here as well. Yeah, this is a good one which shows you that it's this shadow underneath that has defined where his lip is. You know, there's no line here at all. There's a little bit of shading on the upper lip, but there's definitely less. There's almost no there underneath. It's just a bit of shading. Okay. So now we're almost there. Let's see, any other bits that I need to put in. Before you pull off your drawing, make sure you've covered all the bits that you need. Let's put a little bit in for this part of the top bit of her lip there, a little bit underneath the nose, so you can see definitely where it ends. A little bit there. I'm going to put a few marks here to define where the shading and the shadow is. And again here, you can see the shadow there. Now I'm going to draw a line along here to show where the shading on the chin begins. Okay, that goes to there, a bit of shading there. Okay, right, I think that is probably enough. Okay, so before we go on to actually shading, I just wanted to mention that when it comes to when we start adding the charcoal, you need to remember, and I'll go back over this again when we do the eyes, that the eyes are round. Okay, so they're round within the socket. So when you're shading, you need to remember that a ball is going to be shaded. You've got to imagine the light is shining directly forward. Okay, so the edges are always going to be in shadow. The light is hitting the front of the eye, and as it curves around, this bit gets darker. Okay. Now, a lesson in more anatomical drawings about how to very accurately draw a face. It's a long and drawn out affair. For this workshop, this session, we are looking at how to create charcoal drawing, how to use the charcoal and to shade. It's not about working out that the space between the eyes is usually the length of the eye, that the face is split into thirds usually. The nose to the eyebrows is about the same as up to the hairline and down there. There's lots of mathematics involved in portraiture, and if you wanted to go down that route, and that's fine. I've drawn portraits for many years, and I've never really taken much notice of that because everybody's face is so different. I simply just use my eyes to gauge whether something is correct. Right, let's take the picture off and take the photograph off. Again, take that tape off really carefully because it can tear the paper. And we take up the carbon paper. And below should be the basic outline of that face. I'll get rid of the carbon paper. And there she is. Right, remember that you are still working from this photograph, whatever image it is you're working from. So you'll need to keep that next to you. Now, all of you will have normal charcoal. So the stick charcoal, traditional charcoal. Some people might have a few different varieties of widths. Doesn't matter too much. Don't worry if it breaks. Charcoal breaks constantly, and you just get used to using very small bits. A few of you might have charcoal pencils, which I sent out in maybe the first 15 to 20 boxes of materials that I sent out. That was when there was less pickup at the start, and I thought, oh, I think this is all I'm getting now. So I sent out my own charcoal pencils, thinking they would be quite useful. Then lots more people started contacting me, and I simply couldn't. I ran out of my own material, so I didn't send any more. If you have got a charcoal pencil, you can use that. That's fine. You can't sharpen it with a normal pencil sharpener. You need to use a knife. So I'll quickly show you. I mean, even normal pencils are normally best sharpened by a knife rather than a pencil sharpener. And it's just practice. You just get used to being able to very gently start at the woody end, and then particularly with charcoal, which is very soft, you just sort of scrape away at it so that you get a nice point. You have to do it quite gently to gradually build up that point. Okay. Another thing which is very useful for when you're doing charcoal, I don't know what the name of it is called now, is one of these. Now these are what I use when I do my pastel portraits. They're just like a paintbrush, but they've got rubber ends to them, and you can get all different kinds of shapes. You've got pointy ones, you can get flat ones, bevel edged ones, all sorts of different kinds. You can effectively make your own kind of smudger. It's kind of like for helping, smudge things. And what you do is you roll up a little piece of paper really, really tightly. So you want to roll a piece of paper until it becomes a point. You can keep rolling that until you get a little, can you see it? A little bit of a point there. Okay. So that is literally just a little square of paper like this. And then I've rolled it. It takes a little while because you've got to really roll it ever so tightly for it to work. You can buy them. You can buy paper smudgers. They're not very expensive, and they are literally just extremely tightly rolled, and you can actually shave them to a point using a knife as well. So if you really, well, obviously if you're smudging with your finger, that's fine. Some people absolutely hate the feel of charcoal and don't want to do that. Or, you know, when you want to do a very tiny little area, it's quite hard. If you've got little chubby fingers like I have. So it's more helpful to have something like that to help smudge. So we're going to start to the top and the left of the picture. If you are right-handed, you need to either work from the top down or from the left to the right, because obviously if you start the other way around, you're going to be working over the top of what you've just done and you'll smudge it all. So if you happen to be left-handed, you'll be working the opposite way, that way. I normally start with a bit of the hair, just to sort of start the process, frame it in. Be quite loose, but what you don't want to do, we know that she's got dark hair, but we're not going to just colour it all in. You've got to forget about colour, we're just looking at tone. So we're just putting in where some of the darker tones are, the shadows. Okay, so you put in tones there, and then you can smudge them out a bit. I'm going to put in a bit of a black background to bring that hair forward a bit. It's quite a loose background, so it's just effectively sort of just cross-hatching a bit with the charcoal on top. Once you've smudged something, you can work back over the top of it again if you want to put in a little bit more detail. With hair, quite often, less is more. So just put in, don't worry about putting every little hair in. You're getting the sense of the hair without actually having to do the whole lot. If you've got someone like Angelina here, you're going to be flicking that hair back from her forehead, okay, making sure that you keep it slightly broken up. That hairline is not going to be one very rigid line, so you're going to want to break that hairline up. And you follow the sweep of the hair with the style of flicking. So we know that her hair is going backwards like that, so I'm not going to start doing this kind of shading over the top. We need to think about how the hair is, how the hair is growing, and use appropriate kind of strokes. Okay, so we're sort of doing it that way, because with her hair is you know, more curls and sweeps, so we use that, and we make sure we sweep, do long sweeping lines instead. Okay.
Oh, so Kirsty, were you just saying where it's really dark, you're cross-hatching?
That was just for the back. I was just putting in a bit of for the background. You wouldn't do that on the face. That is literally just the background. I'm just sort of putting in a little bit of, you know, tone in the background to bring her forward a little bit. That was all. Yeah. So yeah, don't worry about that. Literally just for that bit there. Then next, just put a little bit. I'll move on. Obviously, I'm doing this quicker than I would normally. I normally take a bit more care over it. So, I'm going to start, bring her in, with a little bit of shading up on the top of her forehead. Now remember, again, for most, even if you have a relatively flat forehead, it is beginning to curve because your head is round, remember, sort of oval shaped. So it's going to be curving, and obviously it curves this way as well. Okay, so this bit here is going to be shaded more, and then it's going to get lighter towards the centre. So when you're shading, You need to build it up quite gradually usually. It's usually the best bet. Put a little bit on. I put it on in fairly small strokes so that I can control it. And then I'm going back over it a little bit more. Smudging. When you're smudging, try and use just one finger, otherwise you can get very messy very quickly. And I'm going around the side of her face. And to help bring this edge of her face forward, what I'm doing is I'm shading behind the face. Okay, so I'm going up to the line and then shading behind it. And that helps bring the face forward. Like that. Now, I'll do a little bit on the eyebrows. And I'm just flicking the little marks in for the eyebrows, because we know even if it was penciled in with eyebrow pencil, her eyebrow is made up of just individual hairs, and that's what we need to get the feel of. You can smudge it slightly, and then you can always go back in to give it a little bit more definition, like that. So swap to a slightly smaller piece of charcoal. Now, this bit of the eye, again, remember it's rounded. If you fill your own eye, this, you know, where the bone comes, it's slightly rounded. So we're going to need shading at the bottom where it starts to hit her top eyelid. So there's the top eyelid, and you're shading out. Where this bit of the eyelid begins to, you know, comes up towards the eyebrow, that's where you want to stop the shading. This little bit of the brow here is where the light pretty much always hits. So you can see it's much paler there, much paler there. Okay. Even on Angelina, you can see it's paler where it begins to go up towards the eyebrow line. So less shading at that point. And I'm going to put in the dark line of the top of her eyelid, the top eyelid. You know that's quite well defined, particularly with the eyelashes. And then I'm going to put in the iris. Now, even if you know that the person you're drawing has very pale blue eyes, you still need to put some charcoal into that iris, otherwise they end up looking like some kind of weird ghost. Put that pupil in, but leave a little bit of the pupil. It's not a complete circle. Leave a little bit free for where you will be putting a highlight. We always highlight in the eyes to make them sort of pop. Most photos you can see the light reflecting in the eyes and you know where to leave it. But even in a photo where the eyes seem almost completely black, you are going to need to put a little highlight in. And it normally hits part of the pupil. So if you can see, I've left the top bit of the pupil without any charcoal. And for the marks I've done on the iris, I've done little lines. So this is it, sort of pretty slightly bigger. Because if you look at your iris, they have those kind of linear marks within the colour. So you need to put those in. So it's like that in there. So the outside of the iris is almost always, on most people, darker. Probably something to do with like the little muscles or something. Now, although we know that these are the whites of her eyes, you have to remember that, as I said, the eye is a ball. So this is the centre of the top bit of the ball where the light is hitting, which means that this little bit over here begins to go into shadow where the ball is curving. So even though it's the whites of her eyes, you need to put in a little bit of shading so that you can get the sense of the eye curving. So you do the shading up until that first mark, and then the second mark was where the eyelashes were. Even if they're really pale and you don't want to put the eyelashes in, you need to put that line in to show where the bottom eyelid begins. And then underneath that eyelid will always be a little bit of shadow, because remember the ball is, you know, how the eyeball is much bigger, obviously, remember, than just this little bit here. It's curving the whole of that bit of the eye. So down here is where that eyeball is causing more shadow. So we shade under the eye. Again, you're doing more shading at the corners than at the centre. Pull it back towards the centre of the eye, because the light is hitting there, and then you can increase the shading as it comes to the inner edge of the eye and where the nose, the bridge of the nose is going to be. So you can darken that up. I haven't put much more in at this bottom bit, that bottom eyebrow. I'll try to put less in there. What I've done is I've shaded the inner part of the eyeball, which then brings that inner eyelid forward. You can put, obviously, more definition for the corner of the eye, and then this bit will be decidedly darker, getting paler as it heads up towards the centre here. A little bit. Remember, this little bit here will have a slight shadow to it, just as this little bit of the eye here has a bit of shadow to it. So you want to make sure that that bit's shaded, and then it comes up to the light, you leave it alone, and then back into a little bit of shading. Now, on the picture here, you can see that there's quite a bit of shadow here, so I'm going to follow that. You just have to learn to look really carefully at the picture you're drawing. So it's darker here, then there's a slight shadow, slightly darker shadow there, darker shadow here, and it's a little bit paler just in there. And it's just identifying, when you look up close, where the lights and darks are, and being quite subtle with those little bits of shading. So there's a darker line down here, and darker in towards the eye, and then paler just there. And then I'm bringing the shading forward down the side of the cheek. I put, oops, that was my knife. I put a few little marks on my picture to show where the dark shadows stop. so I don't go any further than that. Just a little bit of subtle on there. Now this little area directly beneath, so you've got the shadow for the curvature of the eye, and then you have the plane of your cheekbone here, and then it begins to curve back down again. So this section just under the eye where you've got shadow for the curvature, then it pales out again. So you can put slightly less shading there and slightly more then underneath where the cheekbone begins to curve down. Like that. Right, I'm just heading back up to the forehead again slightly. I'm just going to bring a little bit more of that shading forward. A bit darker there. Just gradually building it up. Particularly with sugar paper, you can't really rub things out. Particularly not with a normal rubber. If even if you try to rub it out and it works slightly, the surface is even more delicate than normal cartridge paper, and actually when you go back over it with your charcoal, it will have been roughed up and will alter how the charcoal lays down, and it's not so good. If you're going to use a rubber, you have to use a putty rubber. You can buy these at all art shops, but also probably places like the Works, I should think. They're not overly expensive, but they are literally, you can mould them to any shape. But what it does is that it lifts up some of the charcoal. It won't rub it out completely, unless it really won't at all. But it will lift up if you put maybe down a little bit too much. Okay, so they're quite useful. It works for sort of pastels as well. It won't rub out completely, but it will pick up if you feel like you've added too much. So I'm knocking this back a little bit with my putty rubber. Now the nose. Oh, one thing I didn't mention when we were drawing it out, and hopefully none of you have done it, I'll come back to this one, is that when you're drawing out the image to start with, obviously we went down one side of the nose, hopefully with just a few little marks. Now our nose does not have a definite line. Most people don't. Some men and some very well defined noses, obviously it might be a bit more bony, but we don't want any very definite dark lines, which is why I didn't put anything really down this side. We know that the nose is curved, goes up, over and down the other side, and that has to be done almost entirely with shading. You don't want any really definite lines. Now with someone like her, it's slightly easier because we have it shadow on one side and not on the other, so you can think, well, I'm not going to draw a line because there isn't one to follow. If you were to look at a photo of Angelina face on, you might be tempted, and particularly young children, when I've done this workshop with young kids, have a tendency to do that. Whatever you do, you never ever draw a straight line or one solid line for a nose. This is all just shading. So again, with her, you would have put in a few marks maybe just as a guide, so you know where the bridge of the nose starts coming in for the shadow, but there should be no definite straight line. Even with someone like him, you can see how well defined the bone is, but again, it's all done carefully by shading. So for someone like him, you would have just put in a few guidelines just to show where the shading starts and stops. So you can see that there's a mark there where the bone of the nose ends, and this is just shaded. A lot of portraits, this slightly curved to one side, so the nose is very slightly, looking to one side, is often makes the best portraits, because you get a much nicer shadow on one side of the face and not on the other. If you look at a lot of these portraits, again, one well-defined side and another which is much more subtle. There's another one well-defined side, much more subtle. With the shading, you can see they've really left it alone. They haven't done too much. Even with a chap like him with a well-defined nose, they've tried to leave it alone as much as possible. She's slightly more straight on, but again, they've defined one side and left the other alone. So that's kind of the rule. Try and define one side of the nose slightly better than the other. If you had a photo like this and you think, well, they're both the same, choose one side that's going to be slightly more shadowed than the other. I would probably shade this side of the nose darker because this side of his face is slightly darker. So when it comes to shading, I would shade down here and put in a lot less there. Sometimes it's learning what to ignore when it comes to doing a portrait, and when it comes to noses, definitely less is more. You want to really leave it alone as much as possible. So I'll come back to her nose, and I can put her nostrils in. I can put them in quite nice and dark. Now remember, even though sometimes when you look at a nostril, it can seem to be almost circular. When you do a nostril, it's almost always just the top bit that you're doing. Don't colour in down here. You've just got that shape of up and down, up and down. You can put a little bit of shading behind the nostril to help bring that forward. And this side of the nostril, a little bit of shading, and we can see on the picture that the nose has gone like that, and this sort of flat bit on the top, and then this bit is curving down, so that bit comes in shadow. But going to be very, very careful not to put too much shading in. It's very easy to overdo the shading on a nose and it can go wrong very quickly. It just looks too dark. So small amounts, build it up very gradually and learn to say when enough is enough. So you need enough so that you can say, yeah, that's a very similar nose. I can see that's a nose. It looks like hers. I don't need to do any more to it. I'm shading down the edge of the nose rather than the nose itself. This helps define it. I'm going down the edge of the nose. Now she has dark shadow here. There's a little bit of shading on the top of the nose, just there. So I'm going to put a little bit in, but again, I'm going to be very careful not to overdo it. When I've had to do portraits for people, quite often, it has to be a good likeness, but also it has to capture the person. It doesn't necessarily have to be, they might provide you with a photograph, it doesn't have to be 100% like the photograph. You pick and choose and are very careful with what you put in and what you leave out, so that you get the essence of the person, but the person at their best. Because the majority of people, it's a portrait of someone they love and they just want a beautiful picture of that person. So when I've done pictures of older ladies my age, in their 40s and 50s, and I've put in where their wrinkles are when they're smiling, because that's who they are. But I've knocked them back very slightly so that it looks absolutely like them, but it's their best selves after a good night's sleep. Now, the bridge of the nose is actually a really difficult area to do, because we know that for most people it goes in and out. Too much shading and it looks ugly. Too little shading and they look like a lion. So you have to build it up very gradually. If you look on this photo, there's you can barely make out any shading, but there is a little bit there. So you're just going to have to kind of use, sometimes it's just using your personal judgment. Keep adding a little bit in until it looks about right. And you have to just remember what an actual face looks like. And we know that it goes in a bit there, and it might not look like on the photo so obviously, but we know it does, so you're going to put it in very slightly. I'm going to put a little bit of shading in down this side of her nose. And then underneath her nose. Again, it's very, you have to be very careful not to overdo it, so that it doesn't, you don't want her looking like she's got 5 o'clock shadow. It needs to look like subtle shading. So people obviously have their own different styles of drawing. Some will be much softer and subtle, some will be much bolder, and that's absolutely fine. But you have to remember that you want to build up gradually. And her face is in shadow here, and in this photograph it's quite bold shadow. Now, if you're a confident drawer and you have a particular style that you really go for, then that's fine. You might make it that bold. But I'm not making it as dark as in the photograph. I'm not, I'm keeping it a little bit lighter than it is in the photograph, because I'm going for something that's slightly more subtle. And remembering again that the nose, the eyes are usually the most well defined and the strongest areas. The nose needs to be the least well defined of the portrait. Noses are incredibly complex things and best left alone as much as possible. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the lips. So the top lip is relatively well defined, so we can make that slightly darker. I'm going to gently pencil in, charcoal in that bit. Not a thick black, even though it's quite well defined, it's not going to be a thick black line. I can make that centre line much more defined. That's no problem. And with her lips, again, remember, most people's lips are slightly curved. They're curved that way as well as this way. They come up and then they go back down the other side. Okay, so the corners of the mouth, of the lips here, will be more shaded and in more shadow, and this top little bit here should have a lot less shading, because that needs to stand out more to get that 3D sense. So doing the corners of her lips. Now the bottom lip, if you remember, I said that the bottom lip is very curved, much more curved than the top lip is. So it curves out and then back down again. So this little bit here at the top, you normally have a little bit of shadow, and we get those slight lines in our lips like this. So you put those in, and then at the bottom we leave it alone, and what we do is we put in shading underneath that lip. So I'm not shading the lip itself, I'm shading underneath it. And directly underneath it is where it's the darkest. And then up to the corners, it becomes far less well defined. These bits are always much more subtle. Try and ignore if you've got a photo of a girl and she's got really well defined lips here, it's because she's wearing lipstick. Most people's lips are well defined directly here, and then they're much more subtle up towards the corners. The corner itself can be well defined, that's fine, and helps to give the lip the shape it needs. There's always a little bit of shading at the corner of the mouth. Again, less is more. You don't want too much put in there. Now, her left side of her face is more in shadow, so this part of her lip is slightly more in shadow. What I tend to do when I'm working is I'll put in some details, do some shading, and then normally I leave it, and I think there's just about enough there, and then I will come back to it at the end of the picture. Once I've got the bulk of the picture down, that's when you look at it and you can make a much better informed choice about what needs more work doing to it. Remember, it's very hard to take away, even if it was a pencil drawing on a piece of paper. Rubbing out is not a great thing to do. You can take out small things, but quite often it will smudge, it can damage the paper. So you put in a reasonable amount of detail, and then you leave it alone, and then at the end you come back and you look and you think what bits might need touching up a little bit more. Now I'm going down the side of her face. And we're going to be working on the chin. Now, this part of her chin is in shadow, but I'm being quite subtle with it. Again, it may look quite dark in the picture, but I don't want it to be looking like she's growing a beard. Now, this is something to remember for all pictures that you do. And even if it's not on the photograph, I try and incorporate it. So you can see that she has this white highlight that goes along the bottom of her chin. And then you have the shadow, some shading on the chin here. Now, goes up to about there. That little piece of white is really important to leave in. Make sure you leave that in. Even if on the picture there's not much evidence of it. Let me find Angelina. Okay, so I'm going to put in some shading on here. So I'm going to shade underneath her chin. And then I'm going to shade the chin itself, but I'm going to leave a slight white highlight. I know it's not white, it's sort of blue, whatever on the paper it is, but I'm going to leave a line of light. And I've just incorporated that myself because I know it works. And it's something about that curvature of the chin and going underneath that means that if you keep that slight line, it really lifts the picture and gives a much better effect, 3D effect. Okay, you can see there. So you have smudged it. It doesn't have to be a very definite black line there, but you want to leave that in. On him, you can see if I was to shade behind him, behind his face, and then I'm shading side of his face and down into the chin. You can see that line that has been left, that where the light has hit his face. Always look out for that and incorporate it. It doesn't have to be both sides, just one of the sides. Okay, I'm going to put more shadow in behind her to help bring that side of her face and the chin forward. Remember, the chin is also quite circular, quite rounded. Most chins will have, you know, more shading at the bottom and then up, just so you've got a dark shadow just there underneath the top lip, and then you've got more shading at the bottom, but that bit in the centre you want to leave quite light because of that. You want the curvature of the chin. And this part of her jawline is much softer, so it's shading underneath, and you can blur that line slightly. It doesn't have to be a really strong definite line. Blur it very slightly. Where it begins to then hit back under the chin, you want to make it stronger again. Necks can be problematic sometimes, because there's a lot going on with necks, with all the different cords and things. So quite often, if you're doing a portrait, you might just want to just finish it here, you know, and then it just gently blurs out. You don't need to put in all that additional detail if you don't need to. Behind the ear is really dark, that's fine. Let's see for the hair here. And I'm putting in a little bit of detail in the ear, but not too much. Ears are not the easiest things in the world. Again, you know, often less is more with the ears. And with a portrait, you can quite easily begin to fade out when you get to this point, rather than trying to put in too much detail. Women are quite handy because often they have slightly longer hair. That's quite useful. And hide all sorts of difficulties. If we look at this image, you can see, you know, of his ear. It's quite dark here, so you know, you might just want to be just a bit of subtle shading to give the sense of the shape of the ear. You don't have to go into too much detail with it. Again, with a lot of these images, they're just focused directly on the face, forgotten about everything else. Again, got the sense of the hair there, but they haven't bothered about trying to make sure that it's exact. It kind of just fades out here. So you can let the image fade into the background slightly, like that. Okay. Now I'm putting a little bit of shadow up here because we know that the head is curving over, so this little bit here is going to be shaded. With this eye, there's a lot less shading than that side. So you can keep it quite subtle. Right, I'm just thinking if there's anything else I need to tell you at the moment, because I will probably stop the recording, or I'll pause the recording in a minute, and then come back to it nearer the end, and then if any of the people who are taking part in the Zoom session, which is going along at the same time that I'm doing this, have any questions or any comments, then I can come back at the end of the recording with their comments and questions. Anybody got any questions at the moment they'd like to ask?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
I showed this picture with teeth.
Ah, teeth, yes. Oh, yes. If you have a choice, or someone sends you a picture, don't smile. To be honest, not smiling at all, it works really well. Right. Oh, that's the thought. I haven't done the highlights. I will do highlights first, actually, before I pause, because actually teeth is quite important when it comes to adding the pastel highlights. So good, well remembered. With the teeth, do not, when it comes to the pastel, think, right, teeth are white, I'm going to use that. You kind of ignore that fact. You shade them very, very gently in exactly the same way as you would say the whites of the eyes. Okay, so we know that our teeth, the front ones may be straight on, but they do curve round. So the teeth, as they begin to go back into the mouth, will be in much more shadow. Don't try and define the teeth too much. So with the lines in between the teeth, this is a bit cartoony, but you get the idea. You don't want to go around the lines too obviously. You can put them in, but you want to keep them knocked back so that you get the sense of where the lines are, so you can see that they're there. And usually the underneath the teeth, it's fine to put in more shadow there. And then say these were your front two teeth. I would put in a little bit of shadow, maybe just at the bottom, maybe around the corner, and at near the top, and then just carefully smudge them in a little bit. Again, teeth, less is more. You need to, and it is just a case of trial and error. Very gradually build those teeth up, but without too much detail. And those front two teeth might need a slight highlight, to be honest. If they've got nice white shiny teeth, you can't avoid the fact that they would have caught the light slightly, so you might need to put a bit of highlight on. What I could show you is Leslie, I'm actually doing a portrait of her daughter at the moment. Now it's it's colour, so it's not quite the same, but it'll give you a slight idea. Now Leslie, the picture's nowhere near finished yet, so please. Yes, please be understanding that there's a lot of work to do yet, but we can see. Also, the colour on the visualizer is quite different to what possibly to what the actual picture looks like, because on my laptop it's coming out a completely different colour to what it looks like in actual real life. So take so as you can see, we've got her teeth, and I've defined them with blue, which I use as a sort of shadow. It's good for shadows. And I've not left them white. There's a hint of shadow, because actually, most of the time your mouth is quite shadowed, really. This bit here, it's fine to be dark up in the corners and underneath. But and there's more definition at the top where it hits the gums, those little pointy bits there, and then these bits there's less definition, okay, and these little bits down here there's almost no marks at all. So keep them slightly shaded, and don't add too much white is what I would say.
Gosh.
Leslie, hopefully that will be finished in the not too distant future.
I can't believe how long it's taken me this morning to do not very much.
Yeah, it is, you know, particularly with something like this, where even a quite loose style, you have to be quite careful with faces because they go wrong very, very quickly. I'll just run through the highlights. Now, you do have different choices when it comes to highlights. Under no circumstances do you think her face is white, so I'm now going to colour in her face white, because the white is the blue. The mid-tone, which is all this, is the blue of the paper. And what we're doing with the white is we're adding the highlights. And most of the time, highlights will be in the eyes, a little bit for the eye, the top of the eyelid, maybe the bottom eyelid, just there. Usually the little top bit of the nose will need a touch, the top of the lip, on the top lip, a little bit on the bottom lip, maybe a little bit on the bridge of the nose, a hint up here for where the light will be hitting the curve of the forehead, maybe a little bit on the cheekbone. For this one you might want, because it's so well defined, a little bit of white down there, and then some flecks in the hair. Now let's have a look at some. So someone like this picture, it's pretty highlighted. There's only little bits. Again, although we know the whites of the eyes are white, we don't put them all in. You can just put in a little bit. You can see a little highlight there. Highlights on the nose, little tiny points. So it kicks it forward, but there's not too much going on.
Are you using the oil pastel?
This is not oil pastel. It's the chalk pastel. It's soft pastel. So it should have been just a little piece wrapped up in a bit of paper in with the charcoal. Yeah. This one they've used a lot more. They've decided to go for a real highlight, a much more contrast. But the tone, the brown of the paper is much darker. So you know you can, you know, use it how you want to, but to start off with, I recommend less rather than more, just a few highlights. So I would highlight her eye, and it would be there. I'd highlight the top brow there, a little bit here. Where's she gone? Keep referring back to your photo. I've lost her. I've got a pile of stuff here now. There we go. Maybe a little bit on the top brow there, a bit on her nose here. You can, you can smudge it in slightly. You can leave it quite well defined. Have a little bit on the top lip. Might put a little bit on her on that side, a little bit up here. Like that. Few flecks in the hair. A little bit maybe on the chin. But as with the charcoal, build up your pastel gradually so that you don't overdo things and then regret it. Also with portraits, where, so you can see this side, it's kind of faded out slightly into a darker background. Over this side, rather than, I might put in more detail perhaps for some of her hair that frames her face, that goes around her face. I might put in a bit more detail there. But over here, I might end up just putting a few sketch marks in, so you get the general gist of it, and leaving them unshaded, just leaving the edges of the picture become just a linear sketch. So you have a well-defined centre of the face, then maybe slightly less detail for the hair fading out into the background, and maybe you can just leave a few marks, it's like as if it was a sketch fading out, rather than. And often we do that for clothes. Say you've got a picture of someone, and maybe it's a chap and he's wearing you know, a high collar or something. You don't want to put a lot of detail into that. So what you might do is that you'll just sketch in the outline and then leave it with far less detail. So you can see, oh yes, this is a chap, he's wearing his suit, because maybe that's something that defines him. So they want the suit to be in it, but you don't want to put in a load of detail. So you just sketch in those details and just leave them partially unfinished. Nice pair of teeth over here. Right, okay, so as I was going to do before, I forgot that I hadn't actually put any highlights in. I shall pause the recording and come back right at the end. Okay, so back just for the last few minutes to just give a couple of final pointers. One is that be very careful when you add your white pastel. You have to add very small amounts at a time. It's not the same as charcoal, so it's slightly harder to smudge and it's harder to knock back if you've added too much. So be very cautious with it. Maybe practice slightly first on a separate piece of paper or the corner of the paper first, so you can get the hang of it. That's what one other participant has found that was a bit annoying for her. Another person who's taken part did find it slightly frustrating that sometimes the lines from the carbon paper were too obvious. So again, said it's if you're going to do it again, don't worry about using the carbon paper. You can just use your own carbon paper by literally take the picture that you're going to be drawing and tracing from, turn it over, and add a thick amount of graphite over it. So you need to, put plenty of pencil down, a really soft pencil, at least a 4B. More if you have a 5B or a 6B, they're softer and work better for this. So you would cover the entire area that you're going to be tracing, and then trace the image out. You're going to have to push down quite hard. The graphite does sometimes struggle to come through on the carbon paper slightly. But also what was I going to say? The other thing is if you haven't maybe put in enough detail for you to follow, or you didn't want to put in too many lines if you didn't want them to come through, you can actually, to sort of check how your picture's going, to see how accurate it is, you can measure different parts. So say I was looking at this eye and maybe I didn't put enough markers in on the bottom, and I wanted to double check. I'm going to put my piece of paper on the picture, so from the top of the eyelid to the bottom of the iris, and I'm going to make a mark. And I know that that is exactly that. I'm going to then transfer it to my picture. Let's see. Oh, look, that needs to be a bigger iris, needs to come down to that point. Now I know that the iris is that size. So you can literally measure your picture if you think that it's you know, it's slightly out, something's gone wrong. You can measure, say, from the bottom of the nose up to where the eyebrow is. Let's double check and see if that's accurate. There we go. So if you get a bit lost at any point, a line hasn't come out, then use that measuring technique to double check when you're using two images that are exactly the same size. Don't attempt really to do this on white paper. Firstly, the charcoal doesn't work so well on normal cartridge paper. It does need to be either specialist pastel paper or sugar paper. And coloured paper, giving you that mid-tone, is far more effective than on white. It can be blues and buffs and purples. They're the slightly oranges. They're the colours that work best, that most artists will choose to use. But this style of picture looks just works far more beautifully on a coloured paper. It will be far more successful than if you were trying to do just a normal drawing on white paper. Okay, I think that's everything. I hope that you are very pleased with what you've come out with and discovered that portraits aren't quite as scary as you might have thought. Obviously, if you've been drawing along at the same pace as me, I was drawing slightly faster than I normally would. I would normally take a bit more care and time over it. So, you know, go back, do another one, take your time. Remember, less is more, build it up gradually because you can't rub it out. You can knock things back by using a putty rubber. So if you enjoy doing this, definitely buy a putty rubber. It's very handy to buy these special little smudgers. To be honest, I pretty much always use just one. I've got a whole bunch of them, but I use this one that has a good point to it. That's pretty much the only one I ever use. If not, you know, make your own little one out of a piece of paper. That's fine. Yeah, well, I hope that you've had fun, and if you've created something you're particularly proud of or that you like, then please do email it to me so that I can add it to the website. You can have your name on it if you wish, but if you'd like it to be anonymous, that's fine, and just let me know. And I shall see you next week for some playtime with clay. Okay, thanks, bye.